welcome back to Bottom Line. Let's continue our conversation on unemployment with one of Bloomberg's most accurate economic forecasters. LeBas is the chief fixed income strategist at Janney Montgomery Scott, and he comes to us this afternoon from Philadelphia. Welcome back to Bottom Line. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon.
Talk to me about these numbers today. Labor Department telling us that the figure was 103,000, and the department also said that the nation added more jobs than first estimated in July and August. Has the economy weathered the shocks of the summer?
Well, I like to call this the kind of light in the middle of the tunnel. You know, we haven't really reached the point where we can say that some of the economic distress that really manifested itself over the last few months is behind us. At the same time, with each marginally piece of positive data, the picture at least looks a little bit less pessimistic. And I think our base case forecast continues to be for economic slowness and almost stagnation, not outright recession or outright further job losses.
Well, do today's numbers lessen the odds of another recession then?
Well, they certainly help. I mean, the biggest problem, undoubtedly, for the U.S. economy is the lack of hiring out there. And it becomes sort of a self-fulfilling problem because as consumers who are increasingly unemployed have less to spend, firms make less money and are hesitant to hire. So if we can figure out a way to slowly break this cycle as an economy, then the potential for future job growth gets a lot more impressive. But we're still talking about 2013, maybe even beyond.
Well, Americans are faced with an unemployment rate at still over 9%. The underemployment rate stands at 16.5%. And the September numbers, they're somewhat skewed because nearly half those job gains came from the rehiring of striking Verizon employees. How should average Americans look at today's numbers?
Well, again, I think it's sort of a momentary bright spot amidst what's a relatively slow patch in economic output. We are going to see, I'm fairly confident, areas of hiring as we head into the holiday season, particularly the retail arena. However, those types of jobs, they tend to be somewhat temporary. They tend to be seasonal, so it really doesn't provide that long-term stability. You know, I think Americans are going to take a look at today's jobs release and say, well, hold on a second. That's not what I see. I don't see my job prospects getting all that much easier because I'm looking at the long term.
Well, we also see that temporary help jobs are on the rise, 19,000 created in September. But are we not, at this point, in a structural environment? Americans are going to have to depend on 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet because full-time jobs just won't be there?
Well, it certainly seems that way. Now, we often talk about the unemployment rate and non-farm payrolls. Payrolls are calculated based on a survey of employers. The unemployment rate is calculated based on a survey of households. And what we actually saw is that the number of household jobs increased much more than the number of firm jobs. What that is telling us really is that there are more and more of these part-time and fewer actually of 2-job individuals working in the economy in the month of September.
When do we get to what Mark Zandy of Moody's calls shared returns? When do employees' wages rise in relation to the strength we're seeing in corporate profits? The needle has barely moved on Americans' household income and their standard of living.
It has barely moved, but I think it's actually significant that consumer incomes haven't actually declined despite the high jobless rate. You know, naturally, when employers don't have a lot of demand for labor, the cost of labor, in other words, wages, has a tendency to decline. But we've actually seen wages maintain relatively stable and maybe tick up 1/10 of a point, 2/10 of a point each month. This tells us a few things. Number one, workers' productivity has allowed them continue to maintain similar salaries than they've had over the last few years. Number two, it means that deflation isn't really taking hold in the U.S. economy, and that provides sort of an out, again, a few years down the road for future labor market growth.
President Obama's jobs plan, the White House says it would give the economy a jolt by cutting taxes and increasing spending on schools, roads, and other public works projects. But the president's proposed paying for it in part by raising taxes on the wealthy and on corporations. Given the severity of the nation's economic position, would the president's plan provide enough of an impetus to significantly turn things around?
Well, I think your use of the word jolt in this situation actually is very interesting because that's exactly what we don't need. What we need is something that's longer and a little bit more sustainable. So if you have a 1 or 2 year fiscal program for additional spending, however you finance it to create jobs, that provides a jolt without that long-term stability. And frankly, with the government in sort of permanent cutback mode over the course of the next decade or so, it's very, very hard to make the argument for long-term job creation programs that our nation really needs right now.
Well, yesterday we heard from Arizona Senator John McCain and North Carolina Senator Kay Hagan. They're co-sponsoring legislation that would allow U.S. businesses to bring home offshore profits at an 8.75% tax rate. The current corporate tax rate's at 35%. Last month, the Chamber of Commerce released a study. It predicted that a repatriation tax, as it's called, that holiday, could result in the creation of 3 million American jobs. But as you know, a similar law was enacted in 2004, and that hope for job creation, it didn't materialize, but shareholder profits increased. Would a repatriation tax holiday give the economy what it needs right now?
Well, I'm a little bit skeptical on that account, in part because of that 2004 experience that you referenced, in part because firms aren't hiring workers because taxes are too high. They're not hiring workers because they don't have the profitability, the long-term reinvestment in their business opportunity that they may have had several years ago. So it's not, in our view, really a matter of taxes being too high, regulation being too tight. It's a matter of these organic economic conditions simply not being conducive to hiring. And the only way out of this is time.
Guy, we received word today that Fitch has lowered the credit ratings of Italy and Spain. What's the significance of this for the Eurozone? It's already convulsing because of Greece's sovereign debt crisis.
Well, Italy and Spain, and Italy in particular, are much larger sovereign debt issuers than Greece or Portugal or even Ireland. Italy, as a matter of fact, is the third largest sovereign debt issuer in the world after the U.S. and Japan. So weaker credit conditions in Italy in particular are fairly troubling for the banking system in Europe and also over here in the U.S., as a matter of fact. At the same time, the rating downgrades somewhat confirm what we've already known for a while. The markets aren't treating Italy as a AA rated credit to begin with, so when Fitch cuts them to a AA- credit, well, that doesn't necessarily have a ton of market impact right there.
Guy, 10 seconds. Phillies, Cardinals. Who wins tonight?
Oh, don't even kid me. Phillies.
Guy LeBas, Janney Montgomery Scott, joining us from Philadelphia. Guy, thanks so much. Always a pleasure to have you on.